When we speak of the fall of the Roman Empire, we often imagine a single dramatic moment: barbarians at the gates, Rome in flames, civilization extinguished overnight. Yet this image tells us far more about modern anxieties than about late antiquity itself. Roman authority in the West did not collapse suddenly, nor did it vanish completely. What failed was the imperial system of centralized power, and it failed slowly, unevenly, and largely from within. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the Roman Empire had become a victim of its own success. It ruled more territory than any pre-modern state had ever governed, and it attempted to maintain unity across enormous distances with limited means of communication, transportation, and administration. The empire had been built for conquest. It was not well designed for permanence. Expansion brought prestige and wealth, but it also created frontiers that could never be fully secured. The most dangerous of these frontiers lay along the Rhine and the Danube. Here, Rome faced not a single enemy, but a shifting mosaic of Germanic peoples, tribes, confederations, and warbands, whose movements were driven by pressures far beyond Rome's control. Rather than exclude these groups entirely, Roman policy increasingly relied on accommodation. Barbarian peoples were settled inside imperial borders as foederati, allies obligated to provide military service in exchange for land. In theory, this was a pragmatic solution. In practice, it marked a quiet but decisive change. Rome was no longer defending its frontiers with Roman citizens. It was outsourcing its survival. At the same time, the Roman army itself was undergoing a profound transformation. Military service had once been understood as a civic duty, bound up with citizenship and participation in public life. By late antiquity, it had become a profession, and often a mercenary one. Soldiers fought for pay, land, and loyalty to commanders rather than to the state. Generals commanding armies that owed them personal allegiance became political kingmakers. Civil war followed civil war, draining resources and eroding confidence in imperial authority. Political instability compounded military weakness. The Western Empire in particular suffered from weak emperors, contested successions, and rival courts. The permanent division of the empire in 395 between East and West was meant to improve efficiency, but it had the opposite effect. The Eastern Empire, wealthier and more urbanized, increasingly prioritized its own survival. The West, poorer and more exposed, was left to face mounting crises with fewer resources and less support. Beneath these visible failures lay deeper economic and social strains. The imperial system depended on heavy taxation to sustain its armies and bureaucracy. Over time, this burden became unsustainable. Small landowners were crushed, cities declined, local economies withdrew into self-sufficiency, wealth concentrated in the hands of large landowners who could shield themselves from taxation and increasingly exercise private authority over their dependents. The Roman state still existed on paper, but its reach into daily life was shrinking. Most crucial of all was the erosion of civic participation. Roman government had always been hierarchical, but it had once offered avenues: military service, municipal office, public benefaction, through which individuals could feel invested in the state. By the 5th century, these avenues were largely closed. Ordinary provincials had little influence over policy and little reason to sacrifice for an empire that seemed distant, coercive, and indifferent. Loyalty became abstract. When crisis came, many chose accommodation over resistance. This helps explain one of the most striking features of Rome's collapse: the relative absence of widespread resistance to barbarian rule. The Germanic leaders who entered Roman territory did not usually present themselves as destroyers. They claimed legitimacy, adopted Roman titles, upheld Roman law for Roman subjects, and often portrayed themselves as restorers of order. For many provincials, the change of rulers brought disruption, but not necessarily disaster. The sack of Rome in 410, often treated as a symbolic end, illustrates this point well. When Alaric's Visigoths entered the city, they were not annihilating a thriving imperial capital. They were exploiting a power vacuum created by decades of political paralysis. Rome was no longer the seat of effective government. Its capture shocked contemporaries emotionally, but it did not fundamentally alter the balance of power. What then truly fell in the West was not Roman civilization, but Roman central authority. The imperial bureaucracy collapsed, regular taxation ceased, armies fragmented, emperors disappeared. Yet Roman law endured, Latin remained the language of administration and worship, and Christianity, shaped by Roman institutions, emerged stronger than ever. The Church in particular preserved Roman ideas of order, hierarchy, and universality, even as political unity dissolved. In this sense, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was not the end of an age, but the beginning of another. The destruction of an overextended imperial system made possible new political forms, smaller, more localized, more personal, that were better suited to the conditions of early medieval Europe. The Middle Ages did not arise from the ashes of Rome. They grew from its foundations. Understanding this transformation is essential. It prevents us from mistaking collapse for chaos or change for decline. Roman authority failed in the West because it could no longer meet the demands it had created for itself. What followed was not darkness, but adaptation, and from that adaptation emerged medieval Europe.